Today, we're diving into a really fascinating white paper. And honestly, it reads more like a medical detective story than a dry academic paper. It does something pretty remarkable. It connects a person's biology, their life story, and even their workplace to solve a mystery that, at first glance, just seemed impossible to figure out.
At the heart of it all is this really powerful idea that deep, profound suffering rarely comes from just one thing. Instead, it's a whole web of interconnected factors. And this whole story is really about learning how to see those hidden threads that connect everything.
So, here's how we're going to walk through this. We're going to follow the investigation step by step, starting with the man at the center of this case and his unexplained struggle. Then we'll uncover the surprising physical triggers, trace the chain reaction inside his body, and look at the lifelong foundation that made him vulnerable. And from there, we'll see how neglect at work became outright exploitation, before we finally get to the new path to healing that the paper proposes.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Our story centers on one person, Dennis Farhaj, who was dealing with a set of symptoms that were not only debilitating, but they just baffled everyone who was trying to help him.
So picture this. The central mystery was a total puzzle. You've got impaired vision, this constant physical tension he could feel in his body, and a sort of fog over his ability to think clearly. But here's the kicker. It all came on suddenly, right after a pretty routine surgery. All the pieces were on the table, but nobody could see how they fit together.
The first big break in the case came from two major physical events in Dennis's life. Now, on the surface, they seem completely unrelated, but they happened really close together. First, he has a major gastric bypass surgery. Okay. Then, just a few weeks later, a really loud, sudden sound startles him so badly it causes a physical shock to his system, almost like a whiplash injury. Two totally different events, right? But somehow, they were the one-two punch that triggered everything. And this is the key question the whole white paper sets out to answer. I mean, how on earth could stomach surgery and a whiplash from a loud noise lead to problems with your vision and thinking? The way this paper connects those dots is exactly what makes it so brilliant.
And the answer, as the paper lays out so clearly, is found in a biological chain reaction, a cascade of events that started deep inside his brain and his nervous system.
You can really think of this like a series of biological dominoes. That sudden sound, that startle, directly hit a very specific part of his brain. That, in turn, messed with his attention, his memory, and his spatial awareness. And all of this was happening on top of the biological changes from his recent surgery, which just made his whole system even more fragile. It was, quite literally, a perfect storm. The paper actually pinpoints the neurological ground zero, a tiny part of the brain called the suprapelliamillary nucleus, or SUM. Just think of it as a critical hub that takes sensory input, like a sudden loud sound, and connects it to our body's stress and attention systems. So when that hub got damaged, it sent shock waves through his entire system.
But here's the thing. This whole neurological cascade didn't just happen in a vacuum. As the white paper shows, it landed on a foundation of vulnerabilities that had been quietly building up his entire life.
When they dug into his personal history, the investigation found that lifelong challenges, like dyslexia and some specific gaps in his education, had already created a kind of baseline of chronic stress on his system. He was already running on a low battery, so to speak, long before the surgery ever happened.
Now, this is a really fascinating concept the paper brings in. It's a Dutch term, blootstellingsachterstand, which basically means an exposure deficit. The idea is that if you have reduced language and sight input when you're young, your brain doesn't get to practice integrating all that sensory information, and that can leave your visual and cognitive systems way more vulnerable to big stressors down the road.
And this is such a brilliant insight into how psychological stress becomes a real physical thing. This wasn't just in his head. That lifelong stress actually became physically embodied. You could find it as chronic tension in the muscles right above his eyes and in a key muscle group for posture called the trapezius gray.
Okay, so now we get to the final layer of this story, and honestly, it's probably the most disturbing one: the workplace. This was the environment where all these deep-seated vulnerabilities weren't just overlooked, they were actively made worse.
What you see here is just a devastating gap between what should have happened and what did. The employer had a legal duty to help, to provide accommodations, but instead of offering support, they actually denied it. Even worse, they actively suppressed his natural cognitive strengths, turning what might have been neglect into something much darker: systemic exploitation.
So, his work environment essentially became a trap. It didn't just fail to help him,
It actively used his physical and neurological weaknesses against him, and that just completely blocked any possible path he had to get better.
So, after piecing together this incredibly complex problem, the white paper does something amazing. It doesn't just leave us with the diagnosis, it proposes an equally detailed and powerful solution.
Which leads us to the ultimate question, right? How can anyone possibly recover from such a deep, tangled web of damage that connects their biology, their personal history, and their work environment?
And here it is. This is the big aha moment of the whole paper. They introduced this concept called prismatic cognition. Now, this isn't some quick fix or a simple therapy. It's a complete framework, a whole system designed to rebuild and recalibrate the mind and body from the ground up.
And look at how targeted its goals are. It aims to restore function right back to that little hub in the brain, the SUPM. It works to release that physical tension locked in his muscles. It helps reintegrate his 3D visual skills, and ultimately, it's about reclaiming his ability to learn. It is a truly holistic blueprint for getting better.
At the end of the day, what this is really all about is empowerment. It offers a path grounded in science that allows a person to drive their own healing and evolution, even when they're up against these huge systemic forces.
The huge takeaway from this whole analysis is just how powerful it is at connecting things no one thought to connect before. It shows us, clear as day, how biology, a person's life story, their biography, and even bureaucracy can all intersect to create terrible suffering. But, and this is the most important part, it also shows us how a new way of thinking can offer real, genuine hope.
You know, Dennis Verhage's case is one specific, powerful story, but it leaves all of us with a much bigger question to chew on. How many of the struggles in our own lives or in the lives of people we know are woven together by these hidden threads that we just haven't learned how to see yet? This white paper doesn't just tell one man's story, it really pushes all of us to look deeper.